Welcome to Cellar Door. I'm James. Thanks for stopping in. If you're new to the channel, Cellar Door tells original, snack-sized tales of horror that range from spooky to scary to beautifully haunting, and each story is written and narrated by me. There's no AI, just the results of me clacking away on a keyboard. So if you like original stories with a creepy vibe, then you're in the right place. In today's story, we follow Alan Merrington, an agoraphobe living in a remote house in the forest, who faces inexplicable forces when a grocery delivery service he has relied on for years suddenly ceases operation. Now let's get to it. Devon's car rolled up the driveway, just as it always did on Thursdays at 3:15. Right on time, Alan thought to himself with a smile. He moved to the front door and waited as Devon parked. He looked through the peephole and watched Devon deftly wrestle multiple bags of groceries from the trunk of the car. Clutching several in each hand, he plodded across the yard and up the stairs to the front door. Alan could hear him set down the bags on the other side, and even though he was less than 2 feet away, separated only by a 2-inch door, he waited for Devon to ring the doorbell before he engaged him. "Mr. Merrington?" Devon called out after the doorbell chimed. "Your groceries are here." Alan waited a 3 count before responding, lest he reveal that he hovered just on the other side of the door. "Thank you, Devon," he said. "Same time next week?" "Oh yeah, about that," Devon said. "Mr. Dupree told me to tell you that he's discontinuing delivery service as of this weekend. He said he's really sorry." Alan's face morphed from a mildly pleasant expression to one of abject horror. "What?" he said. "Why?" "He said that it just wasn't economical anymore," Devon responded. "Not enough people use the service, and the ones that do live too far away to justify the expense." "I see," Alan said, trying to contain the fear that threatened to strangle him. "What if I pay the extra expense? Or what if I hire you directly as a separate contractor?" Alan pressed his ear to the door. He could hear Devon shift. "That's nice of you to offer," Devon began, "but the whole reason Mr. Dupree is stopping the service now is because I'm heading off to college. He was only keeping it going as a favor to me, I think." "That's nice of him," Alan said, sweat starting to form on his forehead. "So does Mr. Dupree have any suggestions as to how I can get food delivered out here?" "I don't know," Devon said. "You'll have to call him and ask." "I'll do that," said Alan. He swallowed, then forced out the words. "Hey, Devon, best of luck to you with college." "Thanks, Mr. Merrington. Good luck to you, too." Alan moved to the nearest window and watched Devon climb back into his car and drive away. Once he could no longer see the vehicle, he shifted back to the door, took several deep, courage-mustering breaths, then pulled it open. He scrabbled for the bags on the porch, swiftly grabbing each one and pulling them inside. Once everything was cleared from the stoop, he slammed the door, coming to rest against it as if recovering from a strenuous workout. Alan took a moment to catch his breath. Then he moved his groceries to the kitchen, where he put everything away. Later that evening, he called Mr. Dupree as promised, and as expected, the man had no solution for Alan's dilemma, and the only other grocers in town didn't offer a delivery service. Alan could feel his anxiety percolating. Nearly everything he needed in life could be accomplished through a service he negotiated either online or over the phone. His landscaping was on autopilot, the 2-man team showing up every other week to care for the lawn until summer, when they came once a week. His car was maintained by a mechanic with whom he had worked out a deal covering routine maintenance, system checks, and periodic starts to prevent the battery from dying. All his utilities and mortgage could be paid online, and any repairs the house required were only a Google search away. Food, however, was his Achilles heel. He required regular deliveries, and up until 5 minutes ago, he had that covered. Now, he was up the creek without a paddle, as they say, and as far as he was concerned, there were waterfalls ahead. His therapist, with whom, incidentally, he also utilized the internet to teleconference, would view this conundrum as an opportunity to confront his fears, to take the reins on a situation that demanded an actionable solution. But that solution called for going outside, something Alan couldn't even begin to fathom doing. He understood that he would need to face his long-standing trauma eventually, that not all people were violent individuals who preyed on those less possessed of traditional manly attributes, and though damage to his face and body had repaired itself, not all wounds healed. He knew he couldn't live like this forever, but he was certainly content to give it a try. Alan turned off the lights in his house and went to bed. A good night's sleep would hopefully bring him some clarity in the morning. He read for 10 minutes before he became drowsy, sleep so imminent he didn't hear the low rumble in the walls. The next morning, he adhered to his usual routine of coffee and doom-scrolling the news feed he had curated for himself. It was always the same thing. War in some faraway place, corrupt politicians, some unprecedented weather event in a location unused to its impact. Alan couldn't stomach it today. He had too much on his mind. He decided to prepare breakfast, pulling out bread and eggs from the refrigerator when he stopped in place, frowning. Something seemed off about the counter. He couldn't place why. He walked to the corner of the kitchen where it met another counter at a 90-degree angle and studied their intersection. He followed it to the end and trailed it to the floor where the kitchen tile transitioned to the living room's hardwood floor. Somehow, the second counter seemed longer. Alan passed his eyes over it for a few more seconds before shaking his head and walking away. "You're losing it," he muttered. Convincing himself that it was just his imagination, Alan made breakfast. Then he cleaned up and got to work trying to solve his food problem. 3 days passed and Alan was no closer to figuring out his food delivery issue. He contacted friends and work acquaintances to see if anyone knew anyone who might be looking for a part-time job. But as a remote finance consultant, he had few local friends and business associates to lean on for help. And those who did live in the vicinity offered no suggestions. It became a common response to hear that he either lived too far away, the hours were too sporadic, or that it wasn't worth the effort. Most of the time, though, folks cited all three. He considered taking out an ad, but that meant starting a relationship with a total stranger. Doing so felt like an open invitation to anyone who wanted to take advantage of his situation. Though his ad headline would read something like, "Food delivery person required for regular deliveries to rural location," he envisioned it would be interpreted by someone with ill intention to read as, "Local shut-in too afraid to leave his house needs food delivered to isolated home." Alan stepped away from his computer to look out the window. It was gorgeous outside. If only he could find the courage to enjoy it. He had just started to turn away when his arm bumped the wall perpendicular to the window. He stopped abruptly and looked at the wall. He had looked out this window 1,000 times from the exact same spot on 1,000 different days and had never once bumped into the wall. Until today. Alan studied the wall and its distance from the window's edge. There was no mistaking it. It was, somehow, closer. His pulse quickened as he crossed the living room to the kitchen. He focused on the transition from the kitchen tile to the living room hardwood floor. Something was off. He lined up his feet to the edge of the tile and walked over to the sofa. Alan swallowed. After countless journeys from the kitchen to the couch to enjoy meals or snacks, he knew with absolute certainty that it took a little over 5 steps to reach it. But just now, it had only taken 4. Alan repeated the experiment but got the same result. He moved to the area of the counter where he had raised questions 3 days ago and studied it once again. His eyes swelled with realization. The counter wasn't longer as he originally thought. It was just closer to the edge of the tile than it had been. But how could that be? He passed his eyes around the house. Was it settling? He couldn't imagine a home built 30 years ago suddenly deciding to shift so noticeably. And even if it were, wouldn't he notice cracks in the walls, the floors? Everything about the house appeared normal, only now it felt undeniably smaller. It had to be stress, Alan thought. He was creating things that weren't there to compensate for the anxiety he felt. He needed to solve his delivery problem, if not for his mental health, then for the limited food he had left, which was running out. By the end of the week, he was out of his staples and no closer to resolving his delivery issue. He had pleaded with the other local grocers to institute a delivery program to no avail, and the locally run DoorDash-style delivery service made no promises about whether any of its drivers would be interested. Alan had even offered a substantial tip for any takers, but had heard no replies. While he had enjoyed the advantages of moving to a small town, particularly its lack of people, he was quickly discovering that those advantages came with a crippling downside: limited options. Adding to the situation was the troubling admission that things in the house were moving. He didn't want to believe it at first. To even think it sounded crazy. But how could he explain the kitchen edging even closer to the living room, or the wall now touching the edge of the window? And there were other things. The wall the TV was mounted on was now half the distance to the sofa it was a week ago. The area around his bed had less room to maneuver. The shower nearly touched the toilet and sink. The entire open-plan living area felt significantly more condensed. Alan didn't understand what was going on, and he was starting to get scared. Not only was there some inexplicable and otherworldly business happening, but he was nearly out of food, and things were about to get worse. The next day, after waking to a low-end rumble, Alan discovered that the floor area around his bed was gone. The walls of the room pushed right up against the mattress, leaving only the door to the bedroom open. Alan jumped out of bed in a panic and hurried to the living room. It wasn't much better. The walls visibly encroached on the living area, reducing the kitchen, living room, and dining room to a fraction of their original size. Windows along some walls were gone altogether, having been overtaken by opposing walls that claimed the territory. Furniture clustered together in the living room and dining room, with the kitchen area reduced by at least half. Alan's heart throttled in his chest. He turned in a slow, distressed circle. What was happening? How was it happening? His world was literally shrinking around him. He found the front door and saw that it still existed, yet to be overrun. But even with all that he saw, he couldn't bring himself to open it and step outside. He needed help. This was beyond him. He searched for his phone but couldn't find it. He remembered that he had brought it into the bedroom, but when he navigated his way back there, it was nowhere to be seen. Alan's panic transformed to outright terror. What did he do now? With no phone and no one actively checking on him, he was alone. His eyes filled with tears. Then the house moved. The rumbles started in the floor and reverberated through the walls, and no sooner did Alan dial into this incomprehensible sound than the room started to close in. He whirled in a frenzy, watched as the walls of his home trundled toward him and compacted his living space even further. He climbed onto the dining room table when floor space was no longer available, then transferred to the sofa when even it suffered the consequences of the advancing walls. He involuntarily cried out as he jockeyed for position in the melee. The walls continued their onslaught, pushing everything in their way into a junkyard pile in the center of the room. Alan climbed over chairs and tables, desperately hoping this nightmare would end. He threw out his arms for balance and suffered a jolt of nausea when he realized he could touch a wall on either side of him. In seconds, he would be crushed. He again located the front door. He was out of options. Alan scrambled toward it over the rubble that used to be his living room set, the walls effortlessly crushing anything in their path, much like a trash compactor. He could hear the house groan with the movement as they closed in. Alan pulled himself over broken furniture, hauled himself over the debris of his life until the front door was just within reach. But the walls were unceasing, limiting Alan's movement. He twisted sideways, shimmied through the narrow space toward the door. He placed a hand on the knob, turned and pulled it open. Whether by vacuum or sheer force of will, Alan was jettisoned into his yard under an immaculate sky. Panting, he righted himself and looked around. He was outside. He searched the yard and inhaled moist pine air, which slowed his heart rate. Alan looked at his house. He expected to find it in shambles, the inevitable implosion from which he just escaped having reduced it to ruins. But the house was still standing, the front door swinging on its hinges. Alan leaned forward and peered inside. Everything was back in its place. He saw no destruction, no piles of destroyed furniture, only his semi-cluttered home. He stood and put his hands on his hips, laughing the laugh of a man who might be insane. He breathed in again, letting the forest air purify him. Then he glanced over at his car. A wild thought rocketed to his brain, to which Alan acknowledged by saying aloud, "Why not? I've come this far." With growing confidence and a renewed affirmation of life, Alan slipped behind the wheel of his car. He found his keys in the glove box and started the engine. He let it idle as he reacquainted himself with his vehicle. Then he put the car in drive, gripped the steering wheel with both hands, and began his journey into town. He needed eggs, after all. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear other dark tales, I invite you to check out some of the links provided here or to visit my page. And of course, please subscribe to hear my latest. Thanks for listening.